Good afternoon, everyone, dear friends. When I think almost 2 years ago, Alice, right, Christian, we were thinking about this topic for the Nuremberg Academy because as practitioners, as a special advisor, myself and the High Representative, we really had noticed the unfortunate reality that genocide denial, glorification of war criminals is worse than 15 years ago. When I started at the ICTY in 2008, I thought that the situation was going in the right direction. And we have seen over the last years that is unfortunately not the case. And if we look at events over the last few months, they say the first victim of war is the truth, is again a say, I think, which is extremely accurate. And when we were speaking about the event we were planning, we thought obviously about the academic approach, legal questions, the jurisprudence, which are the genocides which have been recognized by international tribunals, Rwanda Tribunal, former Yugoslavia Tribunal. Should it be criminalized or not? Where is the freedom of speech ending? Where is hate speech starting? And we thought, well, we shouldn't only have an academic debate about it because for us lawyers it is intellectually challenging and interesting. But at the end of the day, it is about the survivors and the victims and those who suffer. We like to say, at least myself in speeches, that in fact genocide denial is the continuation of the perpetration of the genocide. First, perpetrators try to destroy a group for who they are and what they believe, and the genocide denial is trying to destroy even the memory about the group. So we thought to contextualize the topic and to show the human dimension, it would probably be a good idea to start by giving the floor to survivors who can speak about their personal experience and what it means for them. Now you have the CVs of my three members of the panel in your documentation, so I will not go too much into details. But of course you know them. Munira Subašić, well, I think we met 30 times, 40 times over the last 15 years. She is the chairperson of the Mother of Srebrenica and Žepa Enclaves. She is very much the symbol in the fight for justice in relation to genocide survivors. She lost her husband, her son, more than 20 members of her family. So I'm very pleased that despite your little health issue, you could join us to share your feelings, your testimony with us. And if I can add a little personal word, and for us as prosecutors, she, because believe me, she's very tough, is reminding us every day why it's still so important that also 30 years later, we fight for justice and accountability. So thank you for pushing us every day. To my left, Honoré Gatera. And, well, he was a teenager during the genocide against the Tutsi, 13 years old. He also lost more than 20 members of his family. And he's now dedicating his life to the memory, his life to education, to explain to others what it means to be survivors. He's for the last 13 years, director of the Kigali Genocide Memorial. He has published, he gives conferences, so I'm very, very pleased that you accepted to join us on relatively short notice, and of course we will be very, very pleased to hear more about your experience and how you deal with it and how you deal with visitors coming to the memorial and how you try to really make education a central part. So thank you for being with us. And I'm, of course, again, personally very, very pleased because both situations are in our jurisdiction, and we really thought that it would be interesting because it's, in fact, I think the first time that we have an international event where survivors from both genocide are coming together at one place, and which place would fit better would be than Nuremberg. And that's why, of course, one cannot speak about genocide and atrocity crimes without making the link to the Holocaust. And that's why we're very pleased to have also a historian with us, Christoph Thonfeld, who is the deputy director of the Dachau concentration camp memorial, who will give his perspectives over it, starting with the Holocaust, but also commenting on the cases we will be discussing today. So this is an introduction. Let me move into the topic, and you will all forgive me if we start, of course, with Munira. You know, when this afternoon, taking over from the colleague who couldn't be here to moderate, I looked quickly up the numbers, because at the Srebrenica Memorial Center, they collect the numbers of genocide denial. And I looked that there have been last year 693 acts of genocide denial in the public media in Bosnia-Herzegovina and neighboring countries, 476 in Serbia, 176 in Bosnia-Herzegovina, almost all of them in Republika Srpska, of course, 27 in Montenegro, and 2 in Croatia. And the worst of it is those are not some extremist groups. Those are very often leading politicians in posts of authority, which makes this much worse and which has an impact today. I think that new generations are not developing this critical spirit they should develop in this regard. So, Munira, we know in Bosnia-Herzegovina there are 3 different history books, depending if you are in a Serbian, Croatian, or Bosnian school. What does it mean to you as a survivor, a mother, a grandmother, an activist, to see politicians in your own country deny the crimes you suffered?
Poštovani prijatelji, dame i gospodo, želim na početku prvo da vas pozdravim, da se zahvalim organizatoru, posebno tužiocu na ovakvim lijepim riječima. Meni je drago, danas sam strašno i uzbuđena, a i sretna što sam danas ovdje, jer ovo je mjesto gdje su žrtve posle Drugog svjetskog rata počele da doživljavaju pravdu. A žrtvama je najpotrebnija pravda, istina i odgovornost. Dobro.
I'm really sorry. I'm not an interpreter officially, but I volunteered to assist here, and so bear with me if I'm missing some of the sentences. It's not on intent, but really because I didn't make all the notes. So Ms. Subašić would like to welcome all of you here today in this particular building where victims started experiencing justice.
Moram reći da u Bosni i Hercegovini postoje 4 istorije.
In Bosnia and Herzegovina there are actually 4 histories.
Jedna bošnjačka, jedna srpska, jedna hrvatska i jedna bjelosvjetska.
There is one that belongs to Bosniaks, one for Croats, one for Serbs, and one for the whole world. There is a word which I can't really translate, bjelosvjetska.
Ali mislim, ovo sve što se desilo u Bosni i Hercegovini, desilo se pred očima cijelog svijeta.
But everything that's happened, that took place in Bosnia and Herzegovina, took place at the plain sight of the whole world.
Jer svijet ništa nije naučio posle holokausta.
Unfortunately, the world hasn't learned much after the Holocaust.
Zamislite, poubijaju vam vaše najmilije pred vama.
Imagine they just kill all your loved ones in front of you.
Siluju vas pred vašom djecom, pred vašim muževima.
They rape you in front of your children, in front of your
Pa vam
husbands.
ubiju muževe, ubiju vam sinove, odvedu vam ćerke,
They kill your husbands, they kill your sons, they take your daughters away.
opljačkaju vas, protjeraju vas,
They rob you, they make you leave your home,
očiste to mjesto od vas, Bošnjaka,
they conduct the ethnical cleansing,
i onda svijet to mjesto da onima koji su to počinili, dobiju nagradu zato što su to uradili. Srebrenica pripadne onima koji su počinili genocid.
and then this town belongs or is given to those who have committed the genocide because Srebrenica today, as a municipality, belongs to the Republika Srpska.
Nigdje u svijetu, a obišla sam čitav svijet, to se nije desilo, to se i desilo nama Bošnjacima na Balkanu, u Srebrenici, u Bosni i Hercegovini.
I've been all over the world and nowhere have I seen anything like that. This is something that's happened only in Bosnia and Herzegovina, only to us, Bosniaks.
I sad negiranje genocida. Svijet je odgovoran.
And then the genocide denial, I think the world is responsible.
Zato što nije donešena rezolucija s kojom bi bilo zabranjeno negiranje genocida, veličanje ratnih zločina, vrijeđanje majki i drugo.
Because there should have been a resolution which basically prohibits genocide denial, war crimes denial, and provocation of mothers.
Ali ipak mi majke smo se izdigle iznad svega.
But we mothers, we sort of rose above all of this.
Obilježili smo mjesto zločina, mjesto genocida, izgradili smo jedan veliki memorijal gdje smo sa bijelim nišanima ispisali istoriju.
We've built a memorial where with the white gravestones we've written history.
Nijedna gumica na svijetu ne može to izbrisati.
No eraser can, just delete that. No rubber eraser or anything can delete that.
Hiljadama i hiljadama mladi svake godine dolaze, obilaže naš memorijal.
Thousands and thousands of young people every year come and visit this memorial.
Djeca iz cijelog svijeta.
Children from all around the world.
I svako treba tamo da dođe i ovdje na ovo mjesto, također treba da dođe i u Srebrenicu.
And I think that everyone should come one day and visit Srebrenica and should come and visit this place.
Mi smo majke želele da Srebrenica bude opomena čitavom svijetu.
We wanted this memorial and Srebrenica to be a warning sign, a reminder for the whole world.
Mislila sam da ću biti ja najzadnja žrtva, nažalost, veliki broj majki plače koji ja i plakaće i dalje.
I thought I was going to be the last victim, but unfortunately, a lot of mothers are still crying and will be crying in the future.
A svaka majka je majka, bez obzira kako se zvala, kome je pripadala, i svi mi smo morali imati majku.
And no matter what her name is a mother, because every single one of you here has one.
Zato smo mi 98. godine, zahvaljujući Bob Dolu koji je došao pokojnoj mu duši iz Amerike, od njega zatražili da ICMP, jedna nevladina organizacija, u stvari posle vladina organizacija, dođe u Srebrenicu i naše kosti koje smo pronašli, iskopali, da našim kostima vrate imena i prezimena kako bi se dokazalo da su naša djeca stvarno naša djeca, jer oni koji su počinili genocid negirali su da smo imali djecu.
And back in 1998, with the assistance of Bob Dole, may his soul rest in peace, and the assistance of the ICMP, who at the time was a non-governmental organization, then later on became a governmental organization, we've managed to convince them to get the bones of our children and to give them names. And in order to prove that actually this happened, because at the time there were a lot of people who were actually negating even that we had kids.
Znači, kroz DNK analizu mi smo našoj djeci vratili imena i prezimena i kroz DNK analizu moglo je Haški tribunal da radi i da ustanovi da je tamo stvarno ubijeno toliko i toliko i da je tamo počinjen genocid.
And with the assistance of the DNA analysis, we've given names to our family members, and that was instrumental in getting the trials at the ICTY basically confirmed that the genocide took place.
I to je istorijska činjenica koju niko ne može pobiti.
And today, that's a historical fact that no one can disapprove. Sorry. Can I continue? Pitanje je bilo kako vi gledate na domaće političare.
Pa kako gledamo na domaće političare?
Back to your question.
Moram ponove reći da je Evropa u tome odgovorna.
I think that Europe bears certain responsibility.
Podijelila je jednu zemlju.
It divided Bosnia and Herzegovina, it divided the country.
Podijelila narod.
It divided the people.
I naši političari koji su izašli iz rata, svako želi svoj narod da zadrži oko sebe, negirajući genocid, veličajući ratne zločince i s tim dobivati dalju produžetak svoga mandata da bude na vlasti i da dalje funkcioniše. Kako mi to gledamo? Ja kažem, oni koji su počinili genocid morali su biti više kažnjeni. Genocid počinili rade kao policajci, rade u skupštinama, u parlamentu, u predsjedništvima. Znači, oni su nagrađeni, a žrtve su ostale žrtve. To je taj sistem koji ne funkcioniše u Bosni i Hercegovini. Jako, jako teško. Biti tamo u Srebrenici, gledati zločince kako su slobodni, kako imaju funkcije i kako oni odlučuju o vašem ponovi životu. To je strašno.
So the international community has divided the country, divided the people and gave politicians the power to basically keep their followers with themselves. So as a result, you have people who are denying the genocide took place, that is denying that the war crime took place. And in my view, those who committed these heinous crimes should have been punished more severely. Unfortunately, they were not. And as a result, we are now seeing them or watching them work within institutions. They work for police. They work within the parliament. So they work within the presidencies. And it is a system that makes it very, very difficult. Criminals are free, and today they work in the local communities, in the municipalities, and they are still, you know that they've committed crimes, but they are now deciding about your rights. When you need something, you need to apply to them, and they'll be deciding on your applications.
Munira, I get back to you with other questions. Let me move on a little bit, okay?
Dobro, okay.
You know, and those of us who are going to Bosnia-Herzegovina quite often see this frustration that we're in a world where individuals who have been convicted for crimes against humanity, war crimes or genocide are glorified back in their own communities, right? There are on the walls in Belgrade more than 300 paintings of General Mladic on the walls, convicted for genocide, evidence shown in the courtroom, videos about the execution of prisoners, and still. So obviously, education in this regard has, I'm afraid, very much failed in Bosnia-Herzegovina, because sometimes when I speak with friends, they tell me that new generations are at times even more radical. And, you know, very often I mean, of course, there's a lot of justified criticism towards the tribunal, and for the Yugoslav tribunal, often we get the comment that not only we have not positively contributed to reconciliation, but negatively, because every time a decision in The Hague was coming out, depending on a conviction or an acquittal, one group would be very excited and very happy, and the other very, very disappointed, where we have always said that, well, justice alone can never lead to reconciliation. Reconciliation has to come from within a society. Victims, members, perpetrators, representatives of the perpetrators, but that a precondition to give reconciliation a chance is accountability for those who committed the crimes, and at least a joint understanding of the responsibility of the past in order to move forward together as one nation. And I think the Rwanda example is very interesting in this regard. It's of course a totally different political situation in which we are. We know that there have been more than 1.2 million individuals have been before the Gacaca courts. Hundreds of cases have been prosecuted at the domestic level with a lot of emphasis on plea agreements. Well, more than 90 cases at the international level, and I'm very pleased that my friend and brother Aimable, the Prosecutor General of Rwanda, is with us. We work very, very closely together on the many, many remaining cases. But when I come to your memorial, or when I go to schools in Rwanda, where there are thousands of people who have been convicted for crimes committed during the genocide, who perfectly well reintegrated society and are working, among others, I have very much the impression that it is much more still a painful but success story. So I wanted to ask you, well, perhaps to say a few words about your personal experience. You were 13 when many members of your family were killed. But I also want to hear a bit more, because you are very much involved in education, how you look at the entire topic of denial. Please.
Thank you very much. It's my honor and a pleasure to be here among you, experts, lawyers at the international level, as a genocide survivor. Before I begin to reply to the question, or even my personal experience as a survivor, I want everyone here in the room to think of one thing. Many of us are parents, others have brothers and sisters. You have families. Think of your young brother or young sister who is 13. For mothers and fathers, think of your son or daughter who is 13. As I conclude, I will come back to this one. As the moderator mentioned, I was 13 years old when the genocide happened in Rwanda in 1994. And I lived with my family at my grandparents' house because my parents were separated. Through the years, I learned at a very young age that we are not the same people. And I always asked my family, if we are not the same, why do we speak the same language? If we are not the same, why do we look alike and we look after our cows together with those children who are telling me that we are not the same? Because at the age of 7, they could tell me that I'm different, that I'm not the same as them. When I started my primary education at 7 years, in 6 kilometers from my home, I was told by my teacher that I was different, and I was the only one in that class at 7 years old. When I turned 8, it was the same. And this was happening to everyone of my age, or even younger than me, or older than me, or over Rwanda. So as we grew up, as young children, we grew up in a country that was telling us that we are not one people, even if we live in the same community, the same conditions. But at a certain moment, I will learn that I'm different from the other guys in my community. And starting school was clearly showing me that this is the truth. If my teacher can tell me and educate me that I'm different from the other classmates that were living or were studying together with me. I was left-handed. I was writing with my left hand, but the teacher had to beat me every day so that I can change my hand so that I can write with the right. And she was doing it not only because it was in the culture of the Francophone or the French-speaking countries, but because I was a Tutsi in the class, so that she could use the pretext that they don't allow children to grow up writing with the left, and she wants me to change, but really that was not behind it. There was another purpose of beating me every day in class so that I change my hand to write. As time was going on in the country, our parents, as I said, I was living with my grandparents who had gone through the experiences of 1959, 1960s, and 1970s when the Tutsi were being chased from their homes. Their homes were being burnt, they were beaten, and they could flee into churches for 1 week or two, and they come back into their homes because the political tensions were being ended. But it was actually the genocide that was being tried. From those experiences that they were telling me, I knew that something would happen again in the future. In the 90s, in the early 90s, when I was in the third year of primary education, that was 1990, in October, the Rwandan refugees who had fled from 1959 till the 90s had decided to start a struggle for the liberation of the country and have a one united country. That's the struggle by the RPF, for those who are familiar with the terms and how the genocide in Rwanda happened. Our teachers at school asked us to get a banana trunk, a banana tree, and we go to the stadium or go to the schools where we were gathering as many schools. That was on the 2nd of October, 1990. That banana trunk we were going to put in the same location and bury them was representing the body of the general who started the liberation struggle, Frederick Rwigema. Every child was asked to do it so that they say they are burying the cockroaches, because we were at the stage of dehumanizing the Tutsi already, where we were called cockroaches, we were called snakes, and many other dehumanizing names in our community. As a personal experience, I refused to go to that movement because my grandparents had already told me that if I go, they will be beating us. And I knew that I was different from the other classmates. When I refused, I was given the heaviest punishment because I had to be beaten 30 sticks by our teacher. As from the African culture, you know, when a kid does a mistake, that was happening in the 90s in Rwanda. The time was difficult, but of course, I didn't know that ahead, in the next 3 years, things were going to get worse. In 1994, on the 12th of April, that when I left our home, because a friend and a neighbor came to tell us that the next day they would attack our home because they want our cows. The cow is was the wealth of Rwandans by that time. It still is nowadays. And we left our home on the 12th of April. I can't forget the date, of course, because the airplane of the President Habyarimana was shot down on the 7th of April. And immediately the genocide that was being planned in advance was going to start. It's not something that happened abruptly. It's not the airplane crash that caused it, but it was planned because the list of the victims were already established. As we cover the topic of the denial, for those who are familiar with Rwanda, there was a general census of the population in 1991. I was already 10, and I could see what's going on because I even had an uncle who participated as a census agent. In the lists of what they were filling up, they were asking how many were in the family and which ethnic group you are. The results of this general census were never published, but in the end, they were burnt. But the lists were already extracted from the general census result so that no one will know the exact number of Tutsi who lived in Rwanda in the 90s. In 1994, the distribution of weapons and the list were so easy because they knew where the concentration of the Tutsi were around Rwanda. After leaving our home, I never went back there. The ruins of our home are still existing. I have photos of that home, but it's not anymore my home, even if the land stands to be for our family. But the memories we had before the genocide and what we had in April will never allow us to go back there. During the 3 months of the genocide, I was hidden personally by a friend and neighbor of our family, together with my cousin. We spent 1.5 months in his house, living under a bed, because they were searching houses every time to see if there are no Tutsi who are being hidden by the friends of their families. The rest of my family went to hide, not to hide actually, because the refugees were gathering in public areas, including the Catholic missions, high schools, seminaries, and even primary schools. So that's where the biggest number of my family was killed, and many of them were not killed in that compound of the Catholic mission of Kabgayi, because the bishop had indicated to the killers and the government that he doesn't want his basilica, which was visited by Pope John Paul II in 1990, to be destroyed because there are Tutsi inside, but they could bring the general transport buses and take the refugees, go and kill them in a forest, and throw their bodies in Nyabarongo River, which is one of the big rivers in my country. We couldn't know where their bodies were thrown. Maybe they are part of those who floated until Lake Victoria in Uganda, because we have a genocide memorial for our victims in Uganda. Maybe they are still somewhere hidden, because we didn't have even get a chance to bury them or find their bodies so that we can bury them in their dignity. I didn't know what was going on that time. Of course, we knew everything about what was happening in Kabgayi after the genocide. After the killings, when the RPF was able to liberate Kabgayi camp, my family left Kabgayi going towards the southeast of Rwanda, but it was on the 2nd of June 1994. But where it was, I stayed there until the 13th of June 1994. And when the RPF got into that small town where we were in Muhanga, we took the same path behind any surviving family member who was at Kabgayi. It is in the beginning of July that I knew that my mom survived, and I could reunite with her in a refugee camp in the southern part of Rwanda, in a region called Bugesera. And we could start another new struggle of surviving and living with the consequences of the genocide. The consequences, number one, is that as a young boy of 13, with what I had seen, walking around the bodies, hiding one night in the home, hiding in the banana the second day, spending nights under the rain, because April is the rainy month in Rwanda. It's like the winter of Rwanda. We went through nights under the rain, trying to hide, have a chance to sleep in a home the other night, and that was part of our lives. Sometimes when I give a testimony, people ask me, what did you eat? We know that eating is in the basic needs and priorities of a human body, but I will never be able to explain what I was eating, because anything was food for us, including grass or anything we could find fresh. Later, when the genocide was stopped by the RPF, the new struggle started. I refused to go back to school as a 13-year-old boy. And the reason why I refused to go back to school was because the school I was going to was the cemetery of my family members. They had fled to Kabgayi, and I was attending school in Kabgayi. Whether it's my class, whether it's the school or the seminar or the different other institutions that were there, I don't know where they died. Whenever I was sitting in class, I was feeling that I'm sitting on the bones of my relatives. So I told my mom, you know what, I'm not going back. The reason why I told you to think of a 13-year-old boy who is yours, or your brother and sister, it's because currently we are speaking of an experience that happened 30 years ago, but it's still happening. We still have conflicts, we still have a genocide ideology, and as experts mainly involved in punishing this crime against humanity, think of those young boys and girls and look at where they will be in the next 30 years. Because I don't want them to be 42 as I am and be sitting in front of an assembly of people talking about such devastating historical events. Let's maybe sit in front of an assembly and talk about a discovery that they had and we are going to Mars. Or they have discovered another electric car that is allowing us to not harm this globe, because also this climate change is another threat of genocide. I don't know how we'll call it, but it's our responsibility to make sure that our 13-year-old boys and girls are not sitting in their 40s and 50s talking about a such devastating event that took their families, that led them to decide as teenagers that they will never go back to school. Because if there wasn't the efforts of my brave mom, that I respect too much, I wouldn't be able to speak in English, because I wouldn't have gone to school to learn, to do my social sciences, to graduate, and to even decide to be part of a journey of genocide prevention. So I was lucky enough that my mom was brave and she could convince me to go back to school. I was a brilliant kid. I told her I will not go to sit in the class, but I will pass the national exam, because I was in the 6th year. In April, the genocide happened. We were supposed to pass the national exam in July, so it was remaining only 3 months. When I decided in 1995 that I will pass the national exam, I went there, I sat, and I was successful. I passed the test by 68%, and I went to high school. At least that moment, I felt that it's not the same school, it's not the same class, and it's not the same children. I could go there, 6 years of high school, but at the beginning, I got refused by the headmaster of the school because I didn't have school fees. And he didn't trust my family, the remaining few survivors, including my uncle, that they're able to pay for school fees. It was painful that I had gone through the efforts of going back to school, and now they're refusing again me to continue studying. Lucky enough, by that time, the government of Rwanda was trying to support survivors. I went through the process and I was able to go to school. Later on, I went to university because the Survivors Fund was created and they could pay school fees for us. As we talk about the reparations, I think that's very important, and in the legal framework or in any social support you give to the survivors. And when I graduated, it was the same time I started working at the Kigali Genocide Memorial, and I'm talking about 19 years ago, actually.
Let me perhaps come back to your experience in your current job a little bit afterwards.
Yes.
No, I think we could, during hours, listen to the stories of survivors, because, you know, it's unfortunately because we as international community have failed you that those tribunals were set up, and that we are all here trying to say never again, but we also know in the meantime that it didn't work. You mentioned also the role by the media in your country at that time. You know, as you probably know, we had over the last few months the Kabuga trial ongoing, which unfortunately was interrupted, where it was so obvious the role Radio 1000 Colin has played. The older ones among you probably remember those images of individuals of the Interahamwe, in one hand a radio, in the other hand a machete, running around, getting information where Tutsis were hiding, where women could be found to be raped. And it's definitely one of the issues we will discuss over the coming days, the role media has to play in prevention or incitement, which is an extremely painful part of the history as well. Now, we have also a historian with us, Deputy Director Dachau Concentration Camp Memorial. I mean, we speak about 30 years ago, and you know, when I'm speaking, when I'm having visitors, diplomats, politicians who are saying, you know, is it not time to move on? Is it really so important to still have accountability for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda? I'm telling your stories, always explaining to say, look, what happened 30 years ago in your lives is in the center of your life every single day of your life. And what we can do in terms of accountability remains extremely important. But we see already that our perpetrators, like with Kabuga and many others, are getting older and that prosecutions are becoming even more difficult. Now, we speak about Dachau concentration camp. Many more years ago, you are dealing with memory, the truth versus justice, historical facts. What are your comments to what you are hearing, putting it in the context of your own experience at Dachau?
Yeah, at first, I want to thank you for having me on this panel. I'm very grateful to listen to the experiences of survivors, although I have done that before, but I find this every time again. It's very, very moving, a very touching experience to have that. And my approach to the Nazi past, mass murder and atrocities, is a scholarly one. So I have no victims of Nazi crimes in the family, and it's rather the other way around, that I found, being born 22 years after the end of the war and after the end of mass murder and mass atrocities, I found that A, in the family, this was never a topic, and B, when I was brought up in school, it was hardly ever mentioned, and within the history classes, it was barely made a topic. So it was rather that I felt there is a substantial lack of something so huge, so harrowing happening in the country where I grew up, and but hardly ever mentioned. Therefore, I started to put my own questions, and it has accompanied me through university education and has stayed with me during a number of university jobs, and now with my job in Dachau Memorial as the vice director and also as the head of research department. So I'm still more on the research side, less on the educational side. And I think what we have heard now, the statements, the experiences of survivors, and the one thing is, of course, outright denial can attack their evidence, their memories. But another important aspect, I think, is when we look at the greater framework, how denial is made possible. I think as a witness, there are two things which are needed. One thing is a receptive audience that you have around you. The other thing is an outside confirmation for what you're telling, to feel acknowledged and to feel that what you remember, what your memories, what your experiences are acknowledged, are confirmed by the outside world. And I think these three factors, the witness with his or her own memories and experiences, and the audience and the confirmation, those factors also play a role in what eventually can lead to denial. I may explain that with a number of examples from Dachau, from the history of the concentration camp, but also from the trials that were held there by US military courts between 1945 and 1948, and also the history afterwards when the memorial was eventually founded in 1965 and has existed ever since. Immediately after the war, as I said, there were the trials in Dachau, held, and one of the witnesses, indeed the only witness who could testify about gassings taking place in the gas chamber at Dachau, was a Czech prisoner doctor by the name of František Blaha. He not only testified in Dachau at the main Dachau concentration camp trial, he also testified a few months later in January 1946 in this very courtroom in the Nuremberg trial. And he testified about so-called trial gassings happening in the gas chamber at Dachau, as there were in Dachau never mass gassings like we know from Auschwitz, from the Operation Reinhardt camps, Srebrenica, Sobibor, and Belzec, and from the euthanasia murder institutions, but only on a very small scale. And as I said, there are only 3 known survivors who can testify to these incidents. But Blaha mentioned in his first testimony in Dachau a number of victims who were killed in the Dachau sick bay, just from his memory. A few months later, he was able to rediscover his own notes that he had taken secretly and then buried in the campgrounds. These notes were retrieved later on, but they mentioned a different number than what he had said in his previous witness statement. This discrepancy between the numbers that he mentioned once, what he remembered by heart, and on the other hand, what he'd put down in his notes, was later on taken on by deniers to say this is a completely made-up statement because obviously he got the numbers wrong. He doesn't know about the exact numbers. So this very important witness for this incident was and still is discredited. When you look up on the internet, when you find Holocaust deniers, unfortunately these websites they score pretty high when you look for them with the search engine, and they still mention František Blaha as somebody who they use as an example to unsettle the evidence about the mass murder. Another thing is the victims themselves, the survivors themselves, could feel easily unsettled with their own memories and experiences. There was immediately after liberation in Belsen, I remember there's a very moving short interview with Anita Lasker-Wallfisch, who survived both Auschwitz and Belsen. She was interviewed immediately after by a BBC team who came to Belsen to get first-hand evidence from the survivors. And she started her evidence with saying, she referred to Auschwitz, although she had experienced liberation in Belsen. She said, the Auschwitz survivors, the few who have still remained, all fear that the world won't believe what happened there. So she starts her testimony by actually acknowledging this is so outrageous that she's afraid nobody will believe. And coming back to Dachau, the same thing actually happened, and that is what also takes the turn towards the legal prosecution, the trials, which of course were held with the intention to bring perpetrators to justice. But there's also that when the survivors came as witnesses to court to testify, very often it happened to them because in court they are asked to name certain individuals who did certain things at a certain place at a certain time. Very specific inquiry about very specific details. But many of the survivors were not in a position to provide those details. They couldn't remember the day, they couldn't remember the date, they couldn't remember the exact time, sometimes didn't even know the names of the perpetrators. So in a way, they were very unreliable witnesses from the point of view of the courts. And that in turn had a huge unsettling effect on survivors' own memory. When may I mention again Anita Lasker-Wallfisch, because I interviewed her myself 16 years ago and still have a vivid memory of this. She stated that after she testified in the Belsen trial in Lüneburg in September 1945, there the same happened to her. She gave her testimony and then was inquired about certain dates, certain times, what day was it, what person, where did he stand, what did he do. And she felt afterwards in a letter that she wrote to a relative, she felt almost like a liar because she couldn't provide all these details and therefore felt she didn't own her own experience anymore. It was a kind of alienation from her own experience. And this was only mended, which she also told me during the interview, 45 years later, she returned to Belsen, this time the memorial site of Belsen, of course. She returned, and there she met a rabbi. And this rabbi had also been a rabbi in the displaced person camp of Bergen-Belsen, where Lasker Walfisch used to live after liberation. And she said, and this rabbi recognized her. It was the first time she comes back after 45 years to Germany and meets this person and who recognizes her and said, "Aren't you Anita?" And she said this moment was for her, so to say, mended her own experience because she felt acknowledged again. That is what I said in the beginning. You need a receptive audience and you need outside confirmation. And that was the moment where she felt she has this outside confirmation again and owns her own experience and her own statement again.
Thank you very much, Christoph. You know, I have this watch there. You know, every time I put my glasses on, I see it's only eight minutes left. So time is really flying. And of course, you know, the examples you gave are very much in the middle of the work we are doing at the tribunals. We had more than 5,000 survivors coming forward to testify at the different tribunals. For some, it was a very traumatizing experience to come again and again, and others said, this was the most important day in my life because I could tell my story and I could see the perpetrators and I could see him being convicted. So, but I really want to come briefly back, of course, to our different panelists. Munira, I know you have 1,000 things to say, and I ask you 2 brief questions, but if you decide to speak about something else, I know I can't impose anything on you. But what have been interesting would definitely be, you know, we speak a lot these days about the gender parts in justice, in crimes, in accountability. And our tribunals have recognized that the elements which constituted the genocide in Srebrenica was not only the killing, the execution of more than 8,000 men and boys, but also the forcible displacement of more than 40,000 women and children. So I really would like to hear very briefly about this experience from your side. But if you want to share another experience, we only have 5 minutes for each panelist left. It's really in your hands.
Ja ću da kažem 2 stvari koje smatram da su najvažnije. Prvo, da kažem da posle genocida je ostalo 5.500 djece bez jednog i bez oba roditelja. 5.500, hajde brže prevodi.
So what I would like to say is that 5,500 kids or children were left either without 1 or 2 parents.
Djeca su gledala kad im ubijaju oca, siluju majku, odvode brata. Djeca su preživljavala genocid i neka se rodila i posle smrti svoga oca.
Kids were watching how their parents were killed, raped, some were taken away, and some children were born after their father was killed.
I mi smo majke uspjele da tu djecu odgojimo bez mržnje i bez osvete.
And we've managed to raise those children without hatred, without the need or the desire to revenge.
Naše dijete ni jedno nije napravilo osvetu. To je za mene najveći ponos.
Not a single kid from Srebrenica has revenged or has done anything that can be constituted as revenge.
Umjesto toga oni su inženjeri, doktori, profesori, gdje se god nalazili, u Evropi, u Aziji, u Africi, u Americi, najbolji su i sve majke svijeta trebaju da uče od nas, majke iz Srebrenice.
Instead, they are now engineers, they are now professors, they are successful people all around the world, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, and I think that mothers around the world should learn from us how to raise kids.
Naš emir koji se nalazi ovdje i on je bio dijete, preživio genocid. Sad je direktor memorijalnog, okupio je 40 naše mlade djece koja će nastaviti naš put, izgradit će memorijal, pokazat će čitavom svijetu da su najbolji među najboljim.
Emir, who is now amongst us here, who was a kid at the time and survived all this, he's brought together 40 young people from Srebrenica who are now with him and under his supervision building up further this memorial that's going to serve as an important piece of history and so that everyone knows what happened.
Nije bilo lahko nama majkama. Zamislite, neka majka ostala sva 4, 5 djece, istjerana na ulicu, nikad nije vodila svoju domaćinstvo, radila, ona je samo gajila djecu, bila u kući, a najedanput morala je da postane i otac i majka i da se bori za tu djecu i da tako uspije da svako njeno dijete je završilo fakultet, govori 2, 3 strana jezika, a možda njihova majka se ne zna ni potpisati.
And these mothers, they were, left with 4 or 5 kids. She historically was never in the position to take care of the home. She was not working. She was the one taking care of the kids. But suddenly she's without any male support. She has to work. She has to be a mother. She has to be a father. And she has to provide. She has to be a fighter. She has to provide everything for her kids. And she's managed. She's managed to bring those kids to become successful people, to speak foreign languages, to have degrees, and yet she herself might not even be able to put a signature on the paper because she's illiterate.
Bilo jako teško i ne ponovilo se nikad i nikome.
It was very difficult, and I hope this doesn't ever happen to anyone again.
Drugo što želim reći o radu Haškog tribunala.
The second thing that I would like to talk about is the work of the Hague Tribunal. And Mr. Prosecutor, please listen to me carefully.
Ja stvarno kao žrtva genocida želim da se zahvalim radu Haškog tribunala.
As a victim of genocide, I would like to thank to the work of the Hague Tribunal.
Koji je radio 30 godina i posle dao nadu našoj djeci da postoji pravda, da postoji pravo, da postoje dobri ljudi, da postoje ljudi koji su radili i koji će raditi za bolje sutra.
The tribunal that over the 30 years has given hope to our people, to our kids, that there is justice, that there is law, that there are good people who will be working on a better future.
Haški tribunal je ustanovio istinu.
Hague Tribunal has established the truth.
A mi moramo tražiti pravdu.
And we need to continue looking for justice.
I moram kazati da je Evropa i svijet nanijeli nepravdu nama u Bosni i Hercegovini i da su dužni da tu nepravdu isprave.
And I think that the Europe and the world have brought injustice to people in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they have duty to correct it.
Posebno se zahvaliti jednom tužiocu Marku Harmonu, kojeg sam prvo upoznala, koji je počinio raditi i obrađivati Srebrenicu.
In particular, I would like to thank to a prosecutor named Mark Harmon, who actually put up the case together and started working on Srebrenica.
Našem Brammertzu nije što je ovdje, da nije dobro radio, ja mu to rekla u lice.
Also to Prosecutor Brammertz, who, not because he's here, because if I was not happy with what he has done, I would have told him that.
Nekad ga osjećam kao moga sina.
I sometimes feel that he's my son.
Također moram se zahvaliti i svom njegovom timu. Ovo je ovdje plavuš, ima još jedna. Uvijek kad sam bila u sudu, pa kad ih slušam, ovoliko mi srce.
Also his team, and there is a blonde lady here. I would like her to stand up.
Da ustani da te vidi.
Please stand up. So every time she does something in the courtroom, my heart is really, really big.
Sudijama također moram da se zahvalim, Meronu, Agiusu i svim koji su zajedno radili udruženo sa našim Brammertzom, donijeli su pravdu, donijeli su presude ali se moramo sad svi pobrinuti kako ćemo zaštititi njihov rad, njihove presude, a Boga mi i nas žrtve. To je nama najveća sad boljka na ovome svijetu.
I also would like to thank to the judges of the tribunal who brought justice, who brought convictions, but it is now up to us to continue fighting for our rights and for the truth.
Zato se moraju svi pobrinuti, pogotovo ljudi koji govore o ljudskim pravima, o pravdi, pravnicima, iskusnim doktorima nauka i svega toga, da zaštitimo ono što se i 30 godina radilo u Haškom tribunalu, a to su presude. Sa tim ćemo biti zaštićene i mi žrtve, sa tim ćemo zaštititi ljudskost i sve ono što je došlo posle genocida.
So basically, I think that all those who are within the field of human rights, professionals, lawyers, academics, we all need to work together to protect what has been built over the 30 years by the Hague Tribunal and to protect that and just to keep working on it.
I na kraju ću reći, razlike su dobre, podjele nisu. Nemojmo se dijeliti na vjere, na nacije, na imena, na boje. Dijelimo se na dobre i loše ljude. Trebamo samo kazati da postoji dvije vrste ljudi, dobri i loši. Ja tako učim moju unučad i tako ću kazati dok sam god živa životom. Hvala vam što ste me slušali. Hvala Bramertzu, hvala mojoj velikoj i gospođici koja se bori za prevenciju genocida. Ljubim te, ustani da te jednom pozdravi velikim aplauzom. Zaslužila si i daješ mi nadu da će, ako Bog da, ovaj svijet se promijeniti.
So what I think is that differences are okay, divisions are not okay. We should not be dividing people based on ethnic rules and lines. We should be dividing people only good or bad people. And that's how I raise my grandchildren, and that's how I would like everyone to raise their children. And I would like to thank you once again. I would like you to stand up again because you fight to prevent the genocide and denial of genocide. I would like you to stand up again so that everyone applauds you once again. Once more, please. And also thank you, Serge, and thank you for listening to me today. I would like to thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Munira. You know, we are often used to be criticized. It's nice to get recognition from those who are the most important to us, the survivors and the victims. So thank you so much. Well, we have still a few minutes left. There will be other panels where we can speak about education and other aspects, but I know when I ask you to make a little break, you wanted to say a few words in relation to education and what you are doing at the memorial, in particular to new generation. So if you can really in 3 minutes summarize what you are doing, and then I give to our historian the final word.
Thank you very much. I was mentioning that 18 years ago, I embarked on a journey of education and genocide prevention, in which everyone who saw me starting as a young man at the Kigali Genocide Memorial was seeing me as a crazy guy. They said, you should leave your past behind and go on, move on, because you have gone to university and there is a lot you can do. But I had a feeling that maybe I have to step into that very difficult field where everyone was escaping from, not because I'm a survivor, but because I had a feeling that the future is in our hands. If we do something, we can prevent what had happened to us. For the last 18 years, I've seen a lot going on in terms of education, educating young people on genocide prevention. Unfortunately, the efforts we are doing are on the tertiary level, where the genocide, we didn't prevent it in advance. We couldn't stop it when it was happening. And then later on, we are dealing with the consequences of the genocide. I wanted to end on something as a question or as a homework for you experts here in the room, Courtroom 600, with its historical name and what it has made in terms of the legal frameworks and documentation. What do these platforms do to educate young people in what genocide would cost to them in terms of the legal part of it? And is there anything that is being done with the big platforms that are being occupied and busy making laws about teaching children that if you commit a genocide, here are the laws that are going to punish you? Because those young people who are denying genocide, right, making cartoons and writing things on the walls, denying the Holocaust, denying the genocide against the Tutsi, using social media, using YouTube, at a certain time education matters. And if one didn't listen to the voice of education, we listen to the voice of the law. That's where I wanted to end. And thank you very much for having me. It was my pleasure. And I hope that these 3 days will be very much educational for me, who are not a lawyer, but a practitioner of genocide education. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christoph. Well, Christoph, what's your advice? You have 40 years more experience, unfortunately, in relation to the conflict. What advice would you give to those who are dealing with memorials in relation to those important genocides?
I don't exactly feel in the position to give advice, but I can, of course, speak from my own experience and talk about what I think are worthwhile actions, approaches. And I think the main thing coming from a memorial site is, now that we are faced with the situation that we have almost no survivors with us from the Holocaust and from Dachau, from the crimes that happened at Dachau, that on the one hand, the material remains become ever more important, that the buildings, the actual sites which still exist, that we preserve them, that we maintain them. That is, I think, our principal goal. And next to it, of course, to keep researching into and use for educational materials the wealth of reports that we have from witnesses, from survivors with us, the few documents. That is probably also one thing that is necessary to mention. Denial, of course, starts in the moment that the crimes happen, with the destruction of documents, destruction of evidence, destruction of the locations of the killing sites. There, again, I could come back to the Operation Reinhardt camps, Belzec, Srebrenica, and Sobibor, which were almost completely destroyed. And there were also the ashes, only the ashes of several hundreds of thousands of victims left, but otherwise nothing to be seen from what these camps had been. That's the beginning of denial, is the destruction of evidence, is the destruction of the traces. And the third thing, of course, is to keep using the artifacts that we have, to keep producing exhibitions, to try to bring those things that we have, bring to an audience, try to bring the stories that belong to these artifacts, that are behind these artifacts, try to make them speak to our audiences, try to make them accessible for people to, who come to memorial sites and try to engage with these histories. And if I'm allowed, as I previously said, the unsettling effect that courts can have on witnesses, there's of course also the other way around, which also plays a part in the Dachau trial. I think those in the audience with a legal background will know the name of William Denson, who was the chief prosecutor in 4 of the 6 main concentration camp trials held at Dachau. There were he kept a kind of diary during his time at Dachau, which was found in his literary estate after he passed away. And it was found and then used by a writer to, in a way, tell the story of his Dachau experience. And there he very closely writes that when he came to Dachau, he wasn't a liberator. He came only later as a jurist to be the prosecutor in the crimes. At first, he felt he himself couldn't believe the number of crimes, the scale of crimes he was confronted with, he was expected to deal with. And he felt, if even I am not convinced of what I've heard here, of what people tell me here, how can I convince the court that these things happened. And what allegedly, according to what's was found in his literary estate, was the diary of a former Dachau prisoner, Edgar Kupfer-Kobawitz, who also kept a secret diary during his time in the camp, and also managed to bury the pages he wrote, and they were retrieved afterwards. And in the preparation for his case, for the indictment of the Dachau, of the 40 former members, SS members of Dachau staff who he was about to indict, he read through Kupfer-Kobawitz's diary and said that was what convinced him these things actually happened. There's a witness, there's a reliable witness, and things became plausible, believable for him. And that's what made him also believe in his capacity to convince the court that the 40 people in the dock should be sentenced, and that's what eventually happened.
Thank you so much for your... You know, this same experience, the majority of prosecutors, when we move from domestic trials, a murder case, an organized crime case, to a genocide case, we all go through this process. You see atrocities which are totally unbelievable, with a total lack of humanity, and where it's really difficult to pass this stage to really understand or try to understand how it is possible that humans lose all humanity in committing crimes against other individuals just because they are different. And I think we will, over the next 2 days, be able to discuss. We will still have 2 presentations today, but I really want to thank my panelists and the last-minute interpreter. We have done an excellent job. Thank you very much for coming in as well. So Munira, Christoph, Honoré, thank you very much for being with us, for sharing your experiences. As I said at the beginning, we cannot have an academic, intellectual debate about an important issue like genocide denial without hearing your voices and your stories, without having them in mind, and to understand that it really matters. Thank you very much, and again, thank you to the panelists.